The sea swallowed the sun long before the divers were ready. Darkness rolled across the waters around Antikythera like a curtain pulled by unseen hands, thickening the air and turning the waves into shifting shadows. The crew of the small sponge-diving vessel, hard men with cracked hands and salt-stiffened beards, stood silent as the wind whispered warnings through the rigging. It was the autumn of 1900, the season when storms woke suddenly, without mercy. Elias Stadiatis, the strongest diver among them, tightened the straps of his heavy suit. The thick canvas clung to his limbs, while brass fittings glimmered faintly in the dim light. Lead shoes waited beside him. A helmet like a bronze dome sat on the edge of the boat, its glass roundels reflecting the restless sea. "You don't need to go down today," someone muttered. "Weather's turning." Elias gave a quiet smile, the kind of smile a man wears when he has spent half his life underwater and knows the sea's dangers more intimately than he knows his own fears. "A few minutes," he said. "I'll bring up whatever's beneath us." The captain watched him for a long moment, then nodded. There was no arguing with Elias, not when he made up his mind. The other men lifted the helmet, lowered it onto his shoulders, and tightened the bolts until he disappeared behind a mask of cold metal. The world narrowed to the hiss of air through the hose. And then Elias stepped off the boat. He sank instantly. 10 meters. 20. 30. Light vanished. Silence grew thick. The sea pressed in from all sides, not hostile, but ancient, watching. He walked forward slowly, each step stirring clouds of sand. Shapes appeared in the darkness, first vague and drifting, then sharp and unmistakable. A curved rib of wood, another beside it, and another. A ship. An enormous, long-dead ship lay broken across the seabed, its timbers scattered like bones after a great battle. Amphorae rested in neat piles, exactly where sailors had stored them centuries ago. Marble limbs, bronze torsos, and sculpted faces peeked from the sand, frozen in eternal poses. Treasures lay everywhere, statues of gods, tools, pottery, ornaments, all wrapped in a thick blanket of time. Elias felt the breath inside his helmet freeze. Here, at the bottom of the Aegean, he had stumbled upon a ghost from the ancient world. He signaled wildly to the surface. By the time he was hauled aboard the boat, eyes wide and voice trembling, the crew knew something extraordinary lurked below. For days they dove again and again, pulling up riches no living person had seen for millennia. Bronze heroes, marble athletes, jewels, fragments of forgotten civilizations. Each piece sent shivers through the men, as though they were disturbing a long sleeping kingdom. But among the statues and artifacts, the sea offered something strange. Something small. Something no one cared about. A lump of corroded metal, cracked and green, fused into a rough, ugly shape. It looked like nothing. It weighed like nothing. It meant nothing. So the divers tossed it into a crate with other scraps, unwanted pieces too damaged or too dull to bother with. And there it might have remained, lost among relics and debris, if not for the eyes of a curious man. Months later, inside the hushed halls of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, Professor Valerio Stace walked past a shelf stacked with unpacked fragments from the wreck. He paused, almost by accident, when the sunlight struck one peculiar object: the ugly lump of metal.
something gleamed beneath its crust. A tiny arc, jagged yet deliberate. He leaned closer. Not an arc. A tooth. A gear tooth. His breath caught. He lifted the fragment, fingers trembling. Beneath layers of calcification, he saw a ring, circular, precision cut. Bronze teeth spaced with mathematical perfection. Impossible. No machine of this complexity should exist in the ancient world. In his lectures, Stasis taught that gears of such design came from medieval clockmakers, thousands of years after the ship sank. And yet here it was, in his hand, whispering secrets older than the Roman Empire. He called for colleagues. They gathered around him, murmuring, arguing, dismissing, then falling into stunned silence. "It cannot be ancient," one insisted. "But it came from the wreck," another whispered. "Then our understanding of history is wrong." Piece by piece, the mystery deepened. Conservators extracted more fragments, revealing interlocking gears, inscriptions, and plates. 30 bronze pieces, each etched with secrets. Like a puzzle speaking a forgotten language. The scholars examined it under lamplight for nights on end. It did not resemble any astrolabe, clock, sundial, or calendar known from antiquity. And yet it contained all of them, and more. Gears predicted lunar cycles. Dials tracked celestial motions. Mechanisms calculated eclipses. Ratios mirrored the mathematics of ancient astronomy. This was not a tool. It was a machine built with the kind of intelligence the world believed impossible before the Renaissance. Something made by a mind who understood the universe so deeply that they could shrink its movements into bronze. Who was this forgotten genius? Where was his workshop? And why did history erase his name? The questions piled higher than the fragments themselves. The mechanism, whatever it was, should not exist. But it did. And in that contradiction lay the story of a lost civilization, one whose brilliance had been drowned by time, storms, and shifting sands. Yet the sea, ever patient, had kept this single voice alive, a whisper from an age of forgotten science. A bronze heart still beating beneath centuries of decay. The machine waited. The truth waited. And as the scholars leaned closer, brushing away the last grains of salt, the ancient gears seemed almost ready to turn again. The storm that had chased the sponge divers toward Antikythera arrived fully in the night, roaring over the Aegean like an angry god. Thunder rolled across the black sky, shaking the cliffs. Lightning tore open the darkness, revealing white streaks of foam dancing atop the furious sea. The tiny island seemed to shrink under the assault, as if trying to disappear into the waves. On the diver's small vessel, barely more than a wooden shell in the storm's jaws, the men held tight to the mast and prayed between clenched teeth. Their work had ended for the day, but the sea never cares whether men are finished. It demands obedience, and sometimes sacrifice. When dawn finally broke, bruised and pale behind the storm clouds, the The crew peeled themselves away from ropes and railings to begin another descent into the deep. The sea had calmed, but the air was still heavy with the scent of danger, like a warning not yet spoken. Elias prepared for the morning's dive with the same calm determination he carried into every descent. His heavy suit was stiff with dried salt. His helmet, polished the night before, now gleamed faintly in the early light. The captain gave him a long look, one part trust, one part worry. "Keep your feet steady," he said. "Storms stir the seafloor, wrecks move." Elias nodded. "I'll be careful." But nothing could prepare him for the secrets waiting below.
He descended once more into the cold blue, sinking past drifting remnants of the storm, clouds of silt, floating weeds, and broken shells carried by the night's chaos. The sunlight dimmed, shadows thickened, and the sea's ancient quiet returned, wrapping him in its slow heartbeat. By the time his boots touched the seafloor, the currents had shifted the sand enough to uncover new shapes. Elias walked forward cautiously, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. Then, there it was. Not just a fallen mast or a broken hull, but the unmistakable curve of a colossal bow. A massive wooden skeleton held together by rusted nails and fate alone. The wreck sprawled across the seabed like a beached whale, ribs exposed, its body torn by time. Elias moved closer, and his breath caught. Bronze figures lay scattered around the wreckage, statues with perfect musculature and serene faces, their arms raised in poses forever frozen. One statue stared up through a mask of barnacles, its lifeless eyes filled with sediment. Others lay broken, a hand gripping nothing but time, a leg bent in an impossible angle, the smooth marble torso of a youth cracked clean down the middle. Elias felt the unmistakable thrill of discovery. This was no ordinary wreck. This was a floating palace, a courier of treasures. His heart pounded as he reached the ship's edge. Amphorae lay stacked like sleeping soldiers, some shattered, others miraculously intact. Ancient coins glittered faintly beneath layers of grime. Fragments of shields lay beside intricately carved furniture pieces. And then Elias saw something stranger still. Dozens of marble statues, heroes, gods, athletes, half buried in sand, as if the ship had been carrying an entire museum. Their forms seemed alive in the dim light, their limbs moving subtly with the shifting currents. A marble head stared directly at him, its expression calm, unnervingly human. Elias hesitated. He had seen many underwater wonders before, but nothing as eerie, as beautiful, as full of silent stories as this. He signaled for the surface. The divers swarmed the site in the days that followed. They moved with the chaotic excitement of men who knew they were participating in history, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. Statues were lifted to the surface, swaying like ghosts as the ropes carried them into the light for the first time in 2,000 years. Some statues emerged whole, bronze horses, goddesses with flowing garments, warriors with spears snapped long ago. Others surfaced in pieces, the sea's slow violence cracking them apart 1 century at a time. Each find stirred wonder. Each piece whispered of lost worlds. Amphorae were opened, coins were collected, carved wood, darkened, softened by decades beneath the waves, was gently raised and carried to shore. But then came the unassuming lump, a small corroded mass, nothing like the magnificent statues around it.
The divers lifted it without thought, too focused on marble limbs and bronze torsos to care about a piece of green, crusty metal. They tossed it into a crate. No one noticed when it clinked softly against the wooden side. No one imagined it mattered. No one knew. And yet that lump held more knowledge than every statue, amphora, and bronze treasure combined. But before that revelation, the divers' focus remained firmly on the ship itself. As they explored, they realized this was no simple transport vessel. It was a galleon of cultural wealth, sailing possibly from Rhodes or Pergamon, carrying crafted wonders from workshops of extraordinary skill. It may have been headed to Rome, a gift to a powerful figure, or part of a merchant's collection meant for noble houses. The exact purpose was lost, but the richness it carried hinted at influence, prestige, and perhaps political ties. One particular discovery shifted the divers' understanding of the wreck. Hidden beneath collapsed beams and broken amphorae, the men found thick bundles of lead sheeting, often used to balance heavy cargo. This was not a random collection of goods. It was deliberately arranged, carefully stored. A floating treasury. The storm that had sunk the ship must have been catastrophic. The vessel shattered against rocks or capsized under immense waves, sending priceless works of art tumbling into the abyss. The crew, the cargo, the ship itself, all swallowed in one violent moment. Time preserved what the sea claimed. But nothing compared to the small, forgotten fragment buried in a crate above deck. While the statues stole the divers' awe, the real treasure slept quietly, waiting for the curiosity of a scholar to awaken it. For now, though, the divers were simply men doing their work, unaware that their rough hands had touched the world's oldest machine.
Unaware they had carried a piece of genius older than empires. Unaware they had hauled from the deep a mechanism that would rewrite human history. As the crew sailed toward Athens with their remarkable haul, the sea closed behind them, reclaiming its vast silence. The storm clouds drifted away. The island of Antikythera faded into the horizon. But beneath the calm surface, the ocean still held its secrets tightly, as if reluctant to reveal all at once. The story of the mechanism was only beginning. For months, the halls of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens echoed with the clatter of treasures from the Antikythera wreck. Curators moved like ghosts under high ceilings, brushing centuries of salt and silt from marble faces that had not seen daylight since Rome was a hungry newborn empire. Bronze heroes stood again under lamps, their hollow eyes catching the glow like sparks of life. Amphorae were catalogued, coins were counted. Every statue was examined as if it might breathe. And then there was the lump. It sat near the back of a long wooden table, ignored, unremarkable, nearly buried beneath scraps of pottery and corroded metal. Its surface was rough, dark green in places, brown in others, no different from the dozens of worthless fragments dredged up with the ship. Weeks passed, then months. No one touched it. No one cared. Until one quiet afternoon in the summer heat. Valerio Stais walked the museum halls with slow steps, hands clasped behind his back, mind wandering over the day's reports. He was a man of method and patience, the kind of scholar who noticed details others overlooked. Today, though, even he felt the usual fatigue of endless sorting and cataloging. He reached the table inside. So many relics, so many stories half told. He picked up a small statue head, admired its craftsmanship, set it down, reached for a bronze fragment, studied its inscription,
placed it aside. His gaze drifted and stopped. There, beneath the clutter, something glinted. A faint metallic sparkle from a crack in the ugly lump of corroded bronze. Valerios frowned and leaned closer. At first he assumed it was nothing more than a shell or pebble fused to the metal. But then the light shifted just a little, and the shape beneath the crust came into focus. A curve. Not random. Not natural. A tooth. A gear tooth. Valerios inhaled sharply. He pulled the fragment free from the pile with both hands, gripping it with the delicate strength of a man holding the impossible. He turned it over slowly, brushing away dust with a trembling finger. Yes, there it was. And not just one tooth. An entire ring. A gear. His pulse quickened. Ancient gears existed, yes, but only simple ones. Nothing like this. Nothing with teeth carved to such precision, spaced so perfectly they demanded complex knowledge of mathematics and astronomy.
Valerios called out to a nearby assistant. "Fetch the others, quickly." Within minutes, scholars gathered around him. They bent over the fragment, voices rising in a mix of shock and disbelief. "It must be medieval," someone said. "It cannot be," Valerios replied. "It was found at the wreck. The site is clearly ancient. A contamination, then. Something fell in later." But another scholar shook his head. "No, the corrosion is consistent. This is ancient bronze." Silence fell. Ancient bronze gears? Impossible. Yet the gear in Valerios's hand was real, solid, measured, crafted with knowledge no one believed existed before the first mechanical clocks of the Middle Ages. Valerios ordered the fragment to be cleaned, carefully, slowly, layer by layer. More details emerged, tiny inscriptions, faint markings in ancient Greek, so small they had to be read under magnification. And beneath them, another gear, and another. This was no isolated piece. It was part of a system, something far more intricate than any artifact uncovered in Greece or anywhere else. The scholars argued late into the night. They lit more lamps, brought more tools, hunched over the fragment with exhausted eyes that refused to look away. "What was it?" one whispered. "A navigation device," another suggested. "Or a calendar." "No calendar needs gears like these," Valerios countered, "and no navigational tool requires this complexity." "Then what?" "No idea, but it is extraordinary. Impossible. And yet here it is." Over the following days, conservators brought more pieces from storage. Fragments previously dismissed were re-examined with a newfound urgency. Soon the table was filled with parts, 30 or so, some small, others large, all covered in the same green crust that hid wonders below. The fragments were arranged like a puzzle. Here a plate with faint zodiac symbols, there a set of gears of varying sizes, thin rods, circular dials, bronze panels dotted with inscriptions that spoke of cycles, phases, months, years. The more they cleaned, the more impossible the picture became. The mechanism was compact, barely the size of a shoebox, yet it contained layers of gears arranged with deliberate mathematical harmony. Each gear was cut to match the motion of something in the sky, something predictable, precise. "Look at the ratio," one scholar murmured, measuring the teeth on 2 gears. "This corresponds to the lunar cycle." Another held up a fragment showing a spiral dial. "This records 19 years, the Metonic cycle."
Valerio stared at them all, shaking his head slowly. It cannot be coincidence. This machine predicted the movements of the heavens. A computer? Someone whispered. The word felt absurd in that room. A computer? From antiquity? And yet, it made sense. All of it. The gears, the dials, the inscriptions, the ratios. These pieces had once formed a device capable of calculating celestial events, eclipses, lunar phases, the movement of stars. A model of the cosmos itself, compressed into bronze and hidden inside a wooden case. The mechanism, though broken, pulsed with an intelligence far beyond anything expected of its time. Scholars debated wildly. Some insisted it must be an outlier, a singular masterpiece. Others wondered if it was the product of a lost scientific tradition. A few whispered the dangerous thought forming in every mind. If they built this, what else have we lost? Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. The mechanism continued to defy every assumption about ancient technology. The museum became a battlefield of theories, each one more desperate than the last. One thing was certain. The gears were ancient. The device was authentic. And its purpose was monumental. Valerios often returned late in the evenings, long after the museum closed, to sit alone with the fragments. The lamplight cast warm circles over the bronze pieces. Shadows of gears stretched across the table, like the ticking hands of a clock that no longer existed. He would run his fingers along the corroded edges and imagine the hands that once crafted them, steady, skilled, guided by a mind that understood both metal and the heavens. Whoever built this mechanism had carved time itself into bronze. A craftsman? No. An astronomer? Not enough. A mathematician? Certainly. But more than that, a genius. And their masterpiece now lay in pieces before him. Silent, patient, waiting for the world to rediscover the knowledge it once held. The machine did not speak, but its gears whispered. Whispered of eclipses, of cycles, of the moon's strange dance, of knowledge nearly erased, of a civilization that reached for the stars with tools forged by human hands. Valerios would never forget the moment he first saw that gear tooth, the quiet shape that changed everything, the spark that lit a fire in the minds of scholars for generations to come. The Antikythera Mechanism had awakened, and history would never be the same. For months, the fragments of the strange ancient device sat under lamplight like wounded soldiers rescued from a forgotten battlefield. Scholars circled them, whispering, arguing, doubting, dreaming. But the mechanism itself, silent, broken, incomplete, gave up nothing easily. At first, it seemed as though the centuries had claimed too much. The inscriptions were faint, nearly erased by salt and corrosion. The gears were fused, their teeth dulled and warped by time. The plates were cracked, their arrangement unclear, their meaning buried beneath layers of mystery. But the mechanism was not finished speaking. All it needed was the right listener. One cool morning, the museum doors opened for a new kind of visitor. Not an archaeologist, not a historian, but a philologist. Nikolaos Theophanides, a man whose life was devoted to deciphering ancient Greek inscriptions. He approached the fragments with the quiet reverence of a priest entering a sanctuary. He lifted a magnifying lens to his eye and leaned close to the largest plate. Dust motes drifted lazily in the sunlight as he traced the faint scratches carved nearly 2 millennia before. "These letters," he murmured, "they're not random at all." He called for another lamp, more light, a brush, a small bowl of distilled water. Slowly, carefully, he cleaned the surface, revealing thin lines of text, letters so small they seemed carved by the hand of someone accustomed to writing on grains of sand. The scholars gathered around him. "Well?" Valerius Stius asked. Nikolaus exhaled slowly. This is a manual." A stunned silence followed. "A manual," repeated Valerius. "Yes," Nikolaus said, voice trembling. "These inscriptions describe functions, instructions, warnings. This wasn't a ceremonial object or a decorative piece. It was meant to be used." The room buzzed with excitement. But the inscriptions revealed more than instructions. They spoke of cycles, astronomical cycles. The Metonic cycle, 19 years. The Saros cycle, 18 years, 11 days. The Callippic cycle, 76 years. Names of months, signs of the zodiac, references to eclipses, solar and lunar. The mechanism was no longer a mystery, not a trinket, not a curiosity. It was a machine built with purpose, a machine that calculated the heavens. As the inscriptions gave up their secrets, the scholars turned their attention once again to the gears. The radiographs showed patterns beneath the corrosion, patterns that corresponded uncannily with the text Nikolaus had translated. One gear connected to another, one dial to a second. Ratios emerged, relationships formed. A hidden structure revealed itself slowly, like a constellation emerging from night. Valerius moved around the table, placing the gears in different configurations, careful not to force any fragile piece. His mind raced through possibilities. What if the large gear drove this smaller one? What if the back plate moved with the front? Someone pointed to a triangle-shaped plate. This might have housed the lunar phase indicator, they suggested. Another raised a thin bronze strip with markings. These align with the months. Piece by piece, theory by theory, the mechanism grew a skeleton, an outline of its former brilliance. Yet the heart of the machine remained elusive, until a young mathematician, Anais Karapanu, stepped forward. She had been quiet until now, observing, listening, absorbing. "May I?" she asked, reaching for a gear. Valerius nodded. She compared two gears, one with 32 teeth, the other with 115. Her brow furrowed. Then she did something unexpected. She closed her eyes, running her fingertips gently along the teeth. "The ratio," she whispered. "This is not arbitrary. This corresponds to the moon's anomaly." Someone scoffed. "The moon's anomaly? Impossible." Anais opened her eyes. "Not impossible. Genius." She pointed to the inscription referencing the equation of the moon, its uneven speed as it orbits the Earth. The gear ratio matched the mathematical value known from ancient astronomical texts. At that moment, understanding dawned. The mechanism used gears to replicate celestial irregularities, something no other ancient device had accomplished, something unheard of in the modern world until highly advanced clocks. "This machine," Anais said softly, does not just track time, it simulates the cosmos.
Not in disbelief, but in awe. Days turned to nights, nights to early mornings as the scholars labored to map every gear, every plate, every inscription. Their exhaustion grew, but so did their exhilaration. Each new discovery felt like hearing whispers from a long-dead genius whose voice had crossed centuries to reach them. A gear with 223 teeth corresponded to the Saros cycle, the rhythm of eclipses. A small pin and slot mechanism reproduced the moon's elliptical orbit. A pair of dials predicted solar eclipses decades in advance. The scholars realized something profound. The Antikythera Mechanism was not a model of the sky. It was a prediction engine, a tool for looking into the future. Perhaps it had been used by sailors navigating unknown waters, or by priests interpreting omens, or by philosophers teaching the structure of the universe. Whatever its purpose, one truth became unmistakable. This machine was centuries ahead of its time. And yet, something still nagged at Valerius, an unanswered question that refused to go away. Where did this knowledge come from? He asked one evening, his voice low. The room was quiet. No one had an answer. As autumn settled over Athens, the scholars finally stepped back and looked at the fragments laid out before them. They still did not know everything. The mechanism was too broken, too incomplete. But they knew enough to be certain of one thing. The ancient Greeks had built a machine so sophisticated, so precise, so shockingly modern that it shattered everything scholars thought they knew about technological progress. The mechanism had begun to speak, but its story was only beginning. Somewhere in its gears, in its inscriptions, in the ghostly memory of its maker, lay the key to an entire forgotten chapter of human history. And now, the chase to understand it had begun.
The fragments of the mechanism lay scattered across the museum table like the broken thoughts of a long-dead genius. Scholars had deciphered cycles, gears, inscriptions, yet a deeper question haunted every mind that dared study the device. Who built it? Who could have imagined such a machine in an age of bronze and candlelight? Whose mind could twist the heavens into gears and ratios, capturing the dance of the cosmos inside a wooden box? The mechanism itself seemed to guard the answer, silent and proud, as if unwilling to give up the name of its creator. But the scholars searching for that name were not easily discouraged. They dove into ancient texts. They examined fragments of history forgotten by most. And slowly, like stars revealing themselves at dusk, 3 names emerged from the shadows. 3 men who might have dreamed such an impossible dream. More legend than man, Archimedes of Syracuse was known to history as the master of machines. He designed war engines, mathematical systems, burning mirrors that could set ships aflame, and devices capable of lifting entire vessels with the strength of a single man. Yet Archimedes lived a century before the shipwreck. Would his work still have been built, copied, transported long after his death? The idea was tempting. The timing nearly fit. And Archimedes had been obsessed with gears. But the scholars hesitated. Archimedes designed machines of war, pumps, levers, mechanisms of force, not delicate astronomical instruments. The Antikythera Mechanism required not only engineering brilliance, but heavenly insight,
a mind tuned not to destruction, but to the music of the stars. Perhaps Archimedes could have done it, but the machine whispered of someone else. Someone who lived and breathed astronomy. Hipparchus of Nicaea, the greatest astronomer of the ancient world, a man who mapped the stars with terrifying precision, calculated the precession of the equinoxes, and produced tables of lunar irregularities that matched eerily with the gear ratios found inside the mechanism. He spent years studying the moon's anomaly. He knew its strange, uneven motion. He created mathematical models so advanced that modern astronomers still marvel at them. The mechanism itself echoed his knowledge.
Its gears mirrored his equations. Its dials followed his cycles. Its inscriptions aligned with his teachings. The scholars felt a shiver the first time they realized the connection. Was Hipparchus the mind behind the machine? Perhaps. Yet something still felt incomplete. Hipparchus was a thinker, a theorist, a visionary. But the mechanism was not only a product of astronomy. It was a product of craftsmanship. Bronze gears with perfect spacing, pin and slot systems cut to the width of a fingernail, engravings finer than a grain of rice. Mathematics alone could not birth such a thing. To create this machine, two worlds had to meet: a mind of the heavens, a hand of the forge. Who could unite them? The island of Rhodes, the birthplace of navigators, craftsmen, engineers, and astronomers. A melting pot of knowledge where sailors charted the stars and scholars debated the nature of the cosmos in open courtyards beneath the sun. It was here that the Stoic philosopher Posidonius taught. Here that skilled bronze workers forged instruments of astounding precision. Here that Hipparchus himself once lived and studied the skies. And Rhodes had something else, a tradition of building complex devices known as mechani, intricate machines used for teaching astronomy, demonstrating the motions of celestial spheres, and predicting events in the sky. One particular workshop, lost to time, whispered faintly in the pages of ancient texts. A workshop where astronomers and craftsmen worked side by side, where gears were born from the marriage of philosophy and metalwork. No names survived from that workshop. No signatures were carved into the bronze they forged. But the scholars studying the Antikythera fragments began to feel a presence, a ghostly echo of a master who lived unrecorded, unpraised, yet whose genius rivaled the greatest minds of any age. This unknown engineer may have learned from Hipparchus. He may have worked under Posidonius. He may have been taught by sailors who knew the rhythms of the stars better than any textbook.
But whoever he was, he possessed a mind that saw the universe not as a vast, unreachable expanse, but as a system of cycles and ratios, a cosmic clock that could be taken apart, understood, and rebuilt. This was the mind that might have conceived the mechanism. This was the mind that turned bronze into starlight. This was the mind history forgot. Late one night, as the museum grew quiet and the scholars left for home, Valerios remained behind. A single lamp burned on his desk, casting golden light over the fragments. He picked up a gear,
one no larger than his palm, its teeth cut so evenly it seemed impossible it was carved by hand. He turned it slowly. To carve such a piece, the maker must have used tools of extraordinary precision. Files small as needles, saws thin as paper, measuring instruments capable of dividing a hair into perfect fractions, and steady hands. Hands that trembled neither with age nor uncertainty. Hands that shaped metal with the confidence of someone who understood the consequences of every stroke. Valerios imagined those hands working late into the night, a craftsman hunched over his bench while the Aegean breeze slipped through open shutters. Oil lamps flickered, bronze shavings fell like tiny spirals onto the floor. The smell of heated metal filled the air. And above him, always, the stars. Stars tracing slow, eternal paths across the heavens. Stars whispering patterns to the man below. Stars that would one day be captured in gears. The mechanism had not been created in haste. It was the product of years, perhaps decades of thought, study, trial, failure, and triumph. Whoever its maker was, he belonged to a class of thinker that appears only a handful of times in human history. A rare mind capable of bending the world to his will, not through force or conquest, but through understanding. As the scholars assembled their theories, one chilling realization echoed in their hearts. The creator of the Antikythera Mechanism had been erased by time.
No title, no inscription, no signature, no mention in surviving texts, only fragments of bronze remembered him. Yet perhaps that was fitting. Perhaps he had never intended fame. Perhaps he knew that knowledge, not glory, was the true immortal. The mechanism, his masterpiece, had crossed 2,000 years to find a new audience. It had survived storms, shipwrecks, corrosion, wars, dust, and neglect. It had endured long after its maker burned to dust. And now, at last, the world was listening. The gears whispered his brilliance. The dials reflected his understanding. The inscriptions carried his voice. He was forgotten in name, but remembered in genius. And as the scholars lit another lamp and leaned once more over the fragments, they knew. They were touching the mind of a man who had built the universe. Winter had settled over Athens, draping the city in a pale, wandering quiet. In the National Archaeological Museum, the halls were colder than usual, their marble floors carrying the faint echo of footsteps like distant whispers. Most scholars had abandoned the Antikythera fragments for the season, retreating to warm libraries and private studies. But not everyone had left. A new figure had entered the story, an outsider with a mind as relentless as the sea that had guarded the mechanism for centuries. His name was Derek de Sala Price, a physicist by training, a historian by passion, a man whose curiosity burned hotter than any weathered lantern. He arrived in Athens with a notebook full of questions and a heart full of determination. While others had treated the mechanism as an archaeological wonder, Price saw it differently. He saw it as a puzzle, one that dared him to solve it. When he first laid eyes on the fragments, he felt a chill, not from the cold air, from possibility. Bronze gears, broken plates, corroded shafts. These were not relics, they were clues, pieces of a machine waiting to be rebuilt. He leaned over the table, eyes narrowed, breath slow. Each fragment whispered to him, and he listened with the patience of a man who knew that answers belonged to those willing to wait. "Show me," he murmured, as if speaking to the mechanism itself. "Tell me what you were."
Price spent days studying the gears. He sketched every tooth, every angle, every scratch. He compared ratios, measured distances, cross-referenced ancient astronomical cycles. The museum staff watched with quiet amusement. They had seen many scholars come and go, all baffled by the complexity of the device. But Price was different. While others saw chaos, he saw design. While others saw fragments, he saw a system. He didn't merely examine the mechanism, he listened to it. One night, after hours of scribbling calculations under the yellow glow of a desk lamp, he stopped mid-sentence. His pencil froze, his eyes widened. He had found something astounding. A gear ratio matching the lunar anomaly cycle. It was the same discovery that Annis Karapanu had hinted at months earlier, but Price pushed it further. He traced the gear train back through multiple layers, realizing the complexity was not isolated, it was structural, intentional. This meant one thing. The mechanism was built around a differential gear system, something that, by all known history, should not have existed for more than 1,000 years after the ship sank. Price stood so abruptly that his chair screeched across the marble. A guard startled awake from his drowsy post. The physicist didn't even notice. His mind raced with possibilities. A differential gear was the beating heart of future mechanical clocks, an invention heralded by medieval Europe, impossible for ancient Greece. Yet here it was, buried in a machine older than the Roman Empire. Price pressed both hands against the table, staring at the fragments as if willing them to speak. "This changes everything," he whispered. And he was right. With renewed resolve, Price dove deeper. He requested radiographs, early X-rays of the fragments, to peer inside the solid masses of corrosion. The museum hesitated. It was risky, expensive, and new, but Price's insistence was unshakable. And when the radiographs emerged, grainy, ghost-like images, they revealed what the human eye could not. Hidden beneath centuries of decay were more gears. Dozens, some small as a fingernail, others larger than a coin, all crafted with impossible precision. Price traced them across the X-ray plates, whispering to himself as he worked. Here, a 53-tooth gear. Here, a 38-tooth. Here, another cycle. He jotted down notes furiously, ink smearing across the page.
Night after night, the mechanism grew inside his notebook. A skeleton of gears, a clockwork of the heavens, a nearly complete reconstruction forming from ratios, shadows, and intuition. He worked until his eyes blurred, until the lamps burned low, until the guards urged him to go home. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The machine had gripped him completely. Weeks later, Price sat surrounded by stacks of paper, diagrams, and radiographs. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, his face drawn from lack of sleep. But his eyes, those burned with fierce, insatiable fire. At last, everything aligned. He placed the final gear into his mental model, connecting it to the main drive. He checked the ratio again, then once more. It worked. The mechanism was not just a calendar, not just a moon-tracking device, not just an artifact of beauty. It was a cosmic engine. The front displayed the zodiac and monthly calendar. The back predicted lunar and solar eclipses. The gears compensated for the moon's irregular orbit. The dials mapped multi-decade astronomical cycles. It was far more than even he had imagined. Price leaned back in his chair, breath trembling with awe. "By the gods," he whispered, "it's a computer." A mechanical computer, the first in the world, built over 2,000 years before anyone thought such a thing possible. As Price prepared his findings, he felt something shift inside him, a strange mix of triumph and humility. He had not merely solved a puzzle, he had resurrected a lost chapter of human genius. His work would shake the foundations of history, science, and archaeology. But in quiet moments, Price felt something deeper than pride. He felt connection to the unknown engineer of Rhodes, to Hipparchus, to the forgotten craftsman whose tools shaped bronze into knowledge. He could almost see them, leaning over their benches, discussing ratios, testing gear alignments, predicting eclipses with minds centuries ahead of their world. He spoke aloud, voice barely more than a whisper. "Who were you?" The fragments gave no answer, but their silence was not empty.
It was respectful, dignified, as if the mechanism itself understood the weight of what had been rediscovered. With diagrams complete, Price commissioned the creation of the first physical reconstruction. Craftsmen followed his instructions meticulously, cutting gears, fitting axles, assembling the machine piece by piece. And when it finally stood on the table, gleaming in polished bronze, everyone present held their breath. It was beautiful, elegant, alive. Price turned the crank slowly. The gears meshed with a soft, delicate sound, like rain touching leaves, like breath moving through an old flute, like time itself stirring after a long sleep. The dials rotated, the pointers danced, the mechanism worked. The ancient machine had been reborn. Price closed his eyes, overwhelmed. He could almost feel the presence of its original maker standing beside him, watching quietly, perhaps smiling. For the first time in 2,000 years, the universe turned inside a box once more. The world had changed. History had changed. Humanity's understanding of itself had changed. And yet the Antikythera Mechanism was not done revealing its secrets. There were still gears unaccounted for, still inscriptions unread, still mysteries buried in its silent bronze heart. Its story was only half told, and the scholars of the modern age had much more to uncover. The moon hung low over Athens, pale and watchful, as if observing the work unfolding within the museum walls. Inside, soft lamplight glowed across tables covered in sketches, gear diagrams, and bronze fragments. The quiet was deep, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock on the far wall, an ironic companion to the ancient gears awaiting their rebirth. Derek de Sola Price, exhausted yet driven by a fire that refused to dim, stood over the mechanism fragments with the care of a man cradling something sacred. Though he had uncovered much, there remained puzzles within puzzles, secrets nested like Russian dolls within the machine's silent bronze heart. For now he was focused on the gears. They were not merely parts. They were mathematics cast in metal, equations given form, the cosmos shaped into circles and teeth. The more he studied them, the more he realized this machine was not content with simple predictions. It aimed to mimic the very behavior of the heavens. And that realization changed everything. Price traced his fingers along the edges of a large gear, its teeth worn, but still sharp enough to suggest a craftsman of astounding precision. He counted the teeth once more. 223. The number was familiar, too familiar. The Saros cycle, a cycle known to ancient astronomers. 223 lunar months, the rhythm of eclipses. The gear seemed to hum beneath his touch, as if proud to finally be recognized after centuries of silence. He reached for another gear, larger, heavier, its surface scarred by corrosion, but still bearing the unmistakable remains of fine workmanship. This one held 53 teeth. 53. Another astronomical value.
This gear, paired with its companion, mirrored the lunar anomaly cycle, the strange wobble of the moon as it orbits Earth. Ancient astronomers understood this wobble through careful observation, but to capture it in gears? Price exhaled in disbelief. The ancient engineer had not only mapped the heavens, he had mechanized them. Price stepped back, letting his mind see the pieces not as fragments, but as relationships. The gears formed families, sets, layers, like dancers moving in circles under the guidance of an unseen choreographer. The smallest gears rotated fastest, representing the flickering motion of the moon through phases. Larger gears turned slower, marking the stately procession of the zodiac, or the long march of solar years. Each gear meshed with another, transferring motion with astonishing delicacy. One cycle influenced the next. One dial responded to another, just as the heavens themselves intertwined. He whispered to the empty room, This is a mechanical universe." The lamplight flickered as if in agreement. But one gear train captured Price's fascination more than any other. The lunar phase mechanism. A tiny bronze sphere, a moon, had once sat on a pin, half black, half white. As the gears turned, the sphere would rotate, showing the moon waxing and waning exactly as it did in the sky. The mechanism didn't just show phases, it calculated them. It accounted for the moon's varying speed, its elliptical orbit, the subtle changes that challenged even seasoned astronomers. To replicate such complexity, the ancient engineer used a pin and slot mechanism, a miniature marvel. Price held the tiny gear in his hand, examining the delicate slit carved with impossible precision. The pin would ride inside this slot, moving closer or further from the center as it rotated, adjusting the speed of the motion. A simple concept, a profound effect. The mechanism did what even many modern clocks could not. It made the moon breathe. Across the table lay another fragment, a thin, circular ring engraved with symbols. 12 emblems curled across its surface, a lion, a bull, a pair of twins. The zodiac. This ring had encircled the front dial of the mechanism, guiding pointer arms that marked the positions of celestial bodies as they traveled through their constellations. Price imagined the original dial, glowing in the light of an oil lamp, turning gently under the hands of an ancient scholar. Each symbol marking time not by days, but by stars. The zodiac ring was more than decoration. It was a calendar written in constellations, a map for sailors, priests, farmers, philosophers, anyone who sought meaning in the sky. Yet even now, Price felt there was more. A second dial? A pointer? A hidden function? The mechanism hid complexities beneath every layer. Ancient Greeks knew the 5 visible planets. They tracked them, studied their retrograde motion, charted their wandering across the sky. Price suspected, boldly, dangerously, that the mechanism might have once included planetary indicators. But no gears survived for such motion. No inscriptions confirmed it. No scholar dared claim it. Yet the zodiac ring, the gaps in the surviving plates, the complexity of the gear trains. They whispered possibilities beyond the safe limits of academic caution. Did you track the planets? Price whispered to the fragments. Did you truly attempt to map all 7 classical celestial bodies? The fragments remained silent. But the silence felt heavy, loaded, almost guilty. If such indicators once existed, they were lost, either swallowed by the sea or destroyed by time. Yet the temptation lingered. Perhaps someday the missing pieces would be found. Perhaps one discovery would unlock the skies again. One evening, while examining the radiographs for the 100th time, Price noticed something strange. An odd shadow behind gear D52. A second layer. An intricate set of teeth invisible to the naked eye. A gear within a gear. He nearly dropped the X-ray. This feature was unheard of in ancient mechanisms. Even complex medieval clocks rarely used coaxial gears of such precision. And yet, this engineer, this unknown master, had carved one over 2,000 years ago. Price realized with a shudder, he was looking not at the evolution of technology, but at its rebirth. For centuries, humanity had believed that mechanical science evolved slowly and steadily, but the Antikythera Mechanism showed a different truth. Knowledge rises, knowledge falls. Civilizations advance, civilizations forget. The ancient Greeks had reached technological heights that would not be seen again for a millennium. Then the line went dark. When the reconstruction neared completion, sketched only in mind and paper, but nearly whole, Price laid his hands flat against the table, palms trembling slightly. Before him was not a pile of corroded fragments. It was not even a puzzle. It was a revelation. The mechanism, in its original form, would have been no larger than a shoebox, its wooden case polished smooth, its dials marked with delicate inscriptions, its gears turning with soft clicks like heartbeat echoes. And inside that box, the movements of the sun and moon, the prediction of eclipses, the cycles of years and decades, the path of stars through the heavens, a universe rendered into bronze and wood, built not by accident, nor by magic, but by a mind that understood nature in a way few ever have.
Price stood in silence for a long time, staring at the fragments. Then he whispered, "Your maker captured the sky." And deep within the mechanism, within the gears of the cosmos, it felt as if something ancient stirred, something proud, something patient, something waiting to be fully understood. The machine was not done speaking, and the next revelation would change everything. Night settled over the museum with a soft, enveloping hush. Outside, the city of Athens glimmered beneath scattered clouds, its narrow streets echoing with distant footsteps and the low murmur of life. Inside, however, time itself felt suspended, as though the ancient machine on the table held the room in a gravitational stillness. For weeks, Price had worked tirelessly. He had traced every tooth, sketched every dial and calculated every ratio, but there was one part of the mechanism that refused to reveal its purpose. A dial on the back, spiral-shaped, divided into hundreds of segments. Too many for the months of a year, too many for a simple calendar, too many for anything obvious. It was a puzzle within a puzzle, and it was about to become the most astonishing discovery of all. Late one evening, Price turned the fragment under the light, letting the glow dance across its surface. The spiral was beautiful in its own quiet way, like the shell of an ancient sea creature, or the etched map of some forgotten labyrinth. He counted the divisions again, and again, and again, each time with growing disbelief. 223, the same number that haunted one of the mechanism's largest gears. He whispered the realization aloud: the Saros cycle. A cycle known to the ancients, a cycle of 223 lunar months, the cycle of eclipses. Solar, lunar. Darkness devouring the sun, shadow swallowing the moon. The spiral was not a simple dial. It was an eclipse prediction engine. Price felt a trembling in his chest. Could it be? Had the ancient engineer truly built a device capable of forecasting eclipses, centuries before mechanical clocks, before the Renaissance astronomy, before the medieval world even attempted such precision? He leaned closer. His breath fogged the glass covering the fragment. There were tiny inscriptions beside each segment, minute letters barely visible, carved with maddening precision. He could make out symbols that looked like small circles and crescents. A few had faint Greek letters beside them. These were not decorative. They were warnings, predictions, prophecies.
Each mark corresponded to the moment the sky would darken. Price grabbed his notebook and began mapping the spiral. His pencil moved rapidly, tracing the divisions, transcribing the letters, marking the small, darkened segments. The more he wrote, the more the truth revealed itself. This dial didn't merely show when an eclipse would happen. It showed what kind, a solar eclipse or a lunar one, whether it would be total, partial, or annular, where in the cycle it belonged, how strong or weak it would appear. All carved into bronze, all rendered in mechanical form. The ancient maker had transformed the heavens into something a human hand could turn, a cosmic prophecy machine. Price pressed a shaking hand to his forehead. No one, not even the most advanced astronomers of medieval Europe, possessed a device capable of such forecasts. But someone, 2,000 years ago, had done it. They had done it beautifully. Price continued reading the spiral, following its loops inward. Every segment seemed to shine with purpose. Every symbol hinted at something deeper. Then he saw it. A marking, faint but deliberate. A notation referring to an eclipse that modern astronomers had recorded in ancient Babylonian tablets. The eclipse of 205 BC. His voice trembled as he whispered, "My God." The mechanism didn't just model generic cycles. It marked specific historical eclipses, anchoring the machine's predictions to real celestial events. This was not theoretical science. This was practiced astronomy at its peak. The creator of the mechanism had not simply known the Saros cycle. He had used it, refined it, engineered it into a tool any educated Greek could operate. All they had to do was turn the crank, and the sky unfolded before them. Price stood up abruptly, pacing the room with long, restless strides. The revelation churned inside him like a storm. This machine had power. Power not just in scientific understanding, but in societal influence. Imagine a Greek priest, centuries ago, turning the crank and declaring, "On the 10th day of this month, the sun will darken. Prepare yourselves." Or a philosopher teaching his students, "Watch how the moon's shadow travels. The gods do not cause eclipses, mathematics does." Or a navigator planning a voyage with the knowledge of upcoming celestial events. The mechanism bridged the gap between myth and science, between fear and understanding, between the unpredictable and the mastered.
Its creator had seized the heavens and held them still long enough to measure them, tame them, and place them into gears. What did the people of the time think of this? Did they marvel? Did they fear it? Did they even understand the brilliance they held in their hands? Price wondered if the device had been a closely guarded secret or a publicly honored marvel. There were so many questions, so many stories buried beneath silt and centuries. But one truth stood unshakable. This machine predicted the future, and it did so with a precision that would not reappear until long after the collapse of the ancient world. Price returned to the fragments, laying his palm gently over the spiral. He could almost feel the presence of the engineer who had carved it, someone who understood the gravity of what they had created, someone who trusted reason over superstition, someone who believed in patterns, cycles, the logic of the universe, someone who looked at the sky and saw not chaos, but order. He imagined the maker standing in a workshop lit by oil lamps, carving inscriptions with a chisel so small it seemed impossible. Outside, waves crashed against the shore of Rhodes. Inside, gears clicked softly as he tested them. When he finished the spiral, perhaps he stepped back and smiled. Not out of arrogance, but out of reverence. He had captured the breath of the universe. Price sat down slowly, overwhelmed by the weight of discovery. This machine was more than ahead of its time. It broke time. It shattered the neat timelines historians had woven. It forced the world to confront how fragile history's memory truly is, how easily brilliance can be forgotten, how knowledge can rise like a star and then vanish. Price knew the mechanism would ignite debates, shake foundations, challenge assumptions, and he also knew this was only the beginning. If the mechanism could predict eclipses, what else had it once been capable of? What pieces were missing? What functions lost to the sea? What knowledge drowned with the ship? The Antikythera Mechanism had revealed its eclipse engine, but its deepest secrets still slept beneath crust and corrosion. Price blew out the last lamp in the room. Darkness fell. Yet even in the dark, he felt the gears turning in his mind, and somewhere, in the silence of centuries, the ancient machine whispered its next secret. Dawn crept slowly over Athens, washing the museum in a soft gold that seemed almost reverent, as though the sun itself bowed to the secrets waiting inside. Derek de Sola Price stood in the quiet room where the fragments of the Antikythera Mechanism lay arranged across a long table. The soft light touched each piece, illuminating the bronze in shimmering highlights, stirring life into the ancient gears. He had reconstructed the lunar cycles.
He had unveiled the eclipse engine. He had traced the mathematics woven into the teeth of every gear. But something still eluded him. Something vast. Something central.
Dawn crept slowly over Athens, washing the museum in a soft gold that seemed almost reverent, as though the sun itself bowed to the secrets waiting inside. Derek de Sola Price stood in the quiet room where the fragments of the Antikythera Mechanism lay arranged across a long table. The soft light touched each piece, illuminating the bronze in shimmering highlights, stirring life into the ancient gears. He had reconstructed the lunar cycles. He had unveiled the eclipse engine. He had traced the mathematics woven into the teeth of every gear. But something still eluded him, something vast, something central, something that tied the entire machine into a single, harmonious whole. Price closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Beneath the hum of the morning air, he could almost hear it. A system, a rhythm, a universe waiting to be reassembled. He opened his eyes slowly, fixed upon the bronze fragments, and whispered, "Show me your heart." And the mechanism did. He lifted a thin circular plate, gently brushing away dust with a soft cloth. Engraved upon its surface were delicate symbols, Greek months, zodiac constellations, days arranged like petals of a cosmic flower. This was the front dial, the public face of the machine. It must once have been smooth and bright, enclosed in a polished wooden frame, its inscriptions clear under the glow of oil lamps. The more Price studied it, the more he understood its intention. This dial was not simply decorative. It was a map of time, a miniature cosmos. With the turn of a single handle, the operator could set the mechanism into motion. Gears meshed, shafts rotated. The pointer swept across the zodiac, showing the position of the sun against the stars. The dial displayed the familiar journey of the seasons, Aries marking spring, Cancer marking summer, Libra marking autumn, Capricorn marking winter. But the dial did far more. It showed where the moon would be, its phase, its speed, its position in the sky. This front dial was a celestial stage, and the universe itself danced upon it. He turned to the reverse side of the mechanism. Here lay the spirals, intricate, layered, dizzying. The Saros cycle of eclipses, the Metonic cycle of 19 years, the Callippic cycle of 76. Each cycle drawn in a perfect curve, each segment a marker of time's long breath, each inscription a whisper of the ancient world's astronomical wisdom. Price could almost feel the presence of the original engineer guiding his hands. The back dials were not meant for casual observation. They were a scholar's domain, a place where astronomical patterns revealed themselves in the turning of gears. When the handle was rotated, the spirals would advance, the gears would shift, and the future would be written before the viewer's eyes. Eclipses foretold, moon phases synchronized, celestial cycles aligned. It was nothing less than a mechanical prophecy. Price moved to the center of the fragments, the part that had haunted him for months, the gear systems. The bronze gears lay in scattered arrangements, each one demanding attention. Some bore 36 teeth, some 90, some 200. Each gear, whether large or small, perfectly interlocked with its companions. Individually, they were beautiful. Together, they were astonishing. Price lifted 3 gears, fitting them loosely together, demonstrating how they would have once meshed within the original housing. He breathed, "Look at this. This gear drives the sun pointer, this one the moon, and this." His finger touched the smallest gear. "This captures the moon's anomaly, the irregularity of its motion. It slows and speeds the moon pointer just as nature does." The realization hit him with the force of revelation. This was not a model of the cosmos. It was a mechanical imitation of the cosmos. The gears did not merely show celestial movement, they behaved like celestial movement. If the moon sped up in the sky, the bronze moon sped up too. If it slowed, the bronze moon slowed too. Ancient calculations were not merely represented, they were performed. Price felt the hairs on his arms rise. This was engineering as poetry, astronomy as art, mathematics as music, a universe in bronze. One fragment had long been overlooked, a sliver of blackened wood, curved and fragile. At first, Price assumed it was ship debris. But under microanalysis, the truth emerged. The wood belonged to the mechanism itself. This was the remnant of a wooden case, once rectangular, with protective doors that opened like the covers of a sacred book. Inscriptions covered its inner panels, providing instructions, explanations, and warnings. Price imagined it, a polished wooden box, carried by a scholar or a wealthy patron, bronze gears hidden inside, dials shining softly, the sky rendered at their fingertips.
But open its doors, turn its handle, and the universe would unfold. As he pieced together the fragments, Price wondered about its original home. Was it kept in the hands of a philosopher on Rhodes? Did it sit on the desk of a statesman? Was it used by sailors steering through unfamiliar waters, or by astronomers teaching students under the stars? He imagined an ancient workshop filled with tools, bronze filings, scrolls of mathematical notes. The maker would work late into the night, carefully polishing gears, aligning axles, adjusting tension until the motion was perfect. Then perhaps he would take the finished mechanism outside, turn the crank, and watch as the pointers aligned with the real stars above. He would lift his gaze to the heavens, then return to the bronze dial, and find the same celestial truth in both. A quiet smile would cross his face. He had done it. He had captured the sky. Months passed as Price refined his reconstruction. Each new insight made the mechanism feel less like a relic and more like a living thing. And then, one quiet morning, it happened. Every gear was accounted for. Every dial understood. Every ratio matched. Every inscription translated. Price placed the last sketch upon the table and stepped back. He had rebuilt the universe. Not physically, not yet, but on paper, in diagrams, in the living model inside his mind. For the first time since antiquity, someone had seen the mechanism complete. A box containing the movements of heaven, a mirror of the cosmos, a computer before computers. Price closed his eyes and exhaled, feeling a profound connection with the unknown engineer who had imagined this marvel thousands of years before. "We found you," he whispered. "Across time, across the sea, We found you. And though the machine remained silent, its presence felt louder than any sound. The universe was turning again.
The island of Rhodes rises from the Aegean like an ancient sentinel, its cliffs sun-bleached, its harbors busy with the calls of merchants, sailors, and bronze workers. Even in antiquity, Rhodes was a crossroads of genius, where scholars argued beneath colonnades and ships from distant kingdoms anchored shoulder to shoulder, each bearing treasures and stories from across the known world. If the Antikythera Mechanism had a birthplace, if its creator had ever walked beneath one sky long enough to be traced, the trail led here. For this was the island of engineers. This was the island of astronomers. This was the island where the stars were not just admired, but measured. And in the heart of this island, perhaps hidden from the world, a workshop once existed. A workshop that breathed life into bronze. Price imagined it often, sometimes late at night when the museum was empty and the lamp on his desk burned low. He pictured a modest stone building overlooking the sea, its windows open to let in the salty wind. Inside, wooden benches lined the walls, cluttered with tools, awls, files, bronze shavings mixed with oil and dust. Rolls of parchment lay half unfurled, covered in diagrams of circles, numbers, and ratios. And at the center of the room, a craftsman. No, more than a craftsman. A man whose hands carried equal parts mathematics and artistry. Bronze dust clung to his fingers like glittering sand. His eyes moved constantly, from the sky outside his window, to the gears on his table, to the scrolls containing the calculations of Hipparchus and other great minds. This workshop would not have been grand. It did not need marble columns or golden statues. Its walls contained a greater treasure, the union of thought and craft, a marriage of mind and metal. Who was he? No inscription told his name. No scroll preserved his voice. No student wrote of learning at his feet. And yet, he left behind something far more enduring than a biography. He left the Antikythera Mechanism. Price imagined him not as an eccentric recluse, but as a teacher. A man who trained apprentices in the art of gear cutting, who spoke at the Stoa, who debated astronomy under the shade of olive trees. His tools were simple, his calculations complex, his ambition greater than his era could comprehend. Perhaps he had studied the works of Hipparchus, copying astronomical tables late into the night. Perhaps he had listened to sailors describe the unpredictable paths of stars over foreign waters. And then, at some point, he must have wondered, can I build a machine that imitates the heavens? Not a model painted on a board, not a diagram in ink, but a living cosmos, one that moved when turned by human hands. This thought alone set him apart from every other mind of his age. Bronze is not a forgiving material. Its teeth must be cut with perfect symmetry. Its axles must be smoothed until friction vanishes. Its plates must be drilled without cracking the entire piece. One incorrect measurement, one slip of the hand could destroy weeks of work. Yet the mechanism's gears were flawless. Each tooth mirrored its neighbor like twins. Each ratio matched ancient astronomical cycles with uncanny precision. Each dial turned smoothly, effortlessly, gracefully.
This was not the work of trial and error. This was mastery. Price held one fragment up to the light, a gear no larger than his palm, and saw the truth instantly. No ordinary craftsman built this. No apprentice made it as practice. No merchant commissioned it casually. This was the creation of the finest mechanics the ancient world ever produced. Perhaps even a team of them. A workshop dedicated entirely to this one task, working in synchronization as perfect as the gears they forged. He imagined them seated at low wooden benches, one carving teeth with a jeweler's saw, another engraving letters so tiny they required a magnifying lens, another filing edges until they gleamed like sunlight on water, all working in harmony, all serving a vision greater than themselves. But even the most skilled craftsman could not have produced the mechanism alone. Somewhere behind the scenes was a scholar, a mind steeped in astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. Perhaps it was Hipparchus himself, now older, guiding younger hands. Perhaps it was a student of his, building upon his mentor's celestial insights. Perhaps it was someone unknown, someone whose brilliance history failed to record. What mattered was that the ideas behind the mechanism were ancient Greek astronomy at its peak. The maker knew
the moon's elliptical orbit, the uneven speed of celestial bodies, the Saros cycle of eclipses, the metonic cycle of years, the zodiac's shifting alignment. Knowledge that was not only advanced, but extraordinary for its time. Knowledge rare enough to be held by only a handful of people in the entire world. And yet this scholar had not kept it hidden in scrolls. He forged it into bronze. He built it into gears. He made knowledge mechanical. One night, Price imagined, it was done. The engineer stepped back from his workbench, wiping sweat and bronze dust from his brow. The oil lamps flickered softly, illuminating the polished wooden case on the table.
The moon's elliptical orbit, the uneven speed of celestial bodies, the Saros cycle of eclipses, the metonic cycle of years, the zodiac's shifting alignment. Knowledge that was not only advanced, but extraordinary for its time. Knowledge rare enough to be held by only a handful of people in the entire world. And yet, this scholar had not kept it hidden in scrolls. He forged it into bronze. He built it into gears. He made knowledge mechanical. One night, Price imagined, it was done. The engineer stepped back from his workbench, wiping sweat and bronze dust from his brow. The oil lamps flickered softly, illuminating the polished wooden case on the table. Inside the box, the gears waited. The dials gleamed. The pointers rested in perfect silence. With trembling hands, he turned the crank. At first, nothing. Then, a soft click. A gear caught. Another turned. The moon's sphere rotated. The pointer swept across the zodiac ring. The mechanism came alive. The engineer watched, breath held, as the machine revealed the sky's hidden rhythms. The moon waxed and waned. The sun traveled through constellations. The dates marched forward with mechanical grace. He had done it. He had built the universe. Not just in theory, but in metal. A universe that any educated Greek could hold, turn and understand. A gift to knowledge, a testament to brilliance, a whisper to future generations. Whoever owned it next, a scholar, a noble, a statesman, treasured it. Perhaps it was kept in a library of scrolls. Perhaps it traveled across islands, shown to astonished friends and students. Perhaps it even served on voyages, guiding sailors by starlight and mathematics. Eventually, it found its way onto the merchant ship that would meet its fate near Antikythera. Why was it there? A gift? A trade? An heirloom being delivered to Rome? No one knows. What is known is this: the hands that built it were among the greatest that ever lived. Hands that combined astronomy and craftsmanship into something the world would not see again for more than 1,000 years. Hands that shaped not only bronze, but history.
Long before the scholars of the modern world understood its purpose, long before the radiographs revealed hidden gears and ancient inscriptions, the Antikythera Mechanism sat silently in the museum, small, corroded, underestimated. Yet even then, it radiated something uncanny, something that tugged at the minds of those who looked too closely. It did not belong to its time. And when Derek de Sola Price unveiled its true nature, when the mathematical precision and cosmic ambition of the device finally shone through the rust and ruin, an unsettling realization swept through every historian, astronomer, and engineer who encountered the machine. There was nothing else like it. Not in Greece, not in Rome, not anywhere for more than 1,000 years. The Antikythera Mechanism stood alone. A solitary peak of ancient brilliance, so high, so sharp, that the rest of history seemed to flatten around it. Price often walked through the museum late at night, thinking of this uncanny isolation. He would pause before the mechanism's fragments, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down like dust. The ancient Greeks had built temples of staggering beauty. They forged weapons of elegant lethality. They sculpted gods from marble, wrote epics, formed democracies. But this machine outshone it all. Not because it was beautiful, though it was. Not because it was clever, though it surpassed modern expectations, but because it existed in a void. There were no other ancient devices with more than a few simple gears, no intermediate steps, no prototypes, no lesser attempts. It was as though a valley of technological quiet suddenly erupted into a mountain. And then, silence again. A silence that lasted until medieval clockmakers rediscovered gear ratios and trembled at the genius of a mechanism made centuries before their time. The more Price studied comparative history, the stranger the timeline appeared. Roman engineers built water mills and aqueducts, but nothing with fine geared trains. The Egyptians mastered stonework, but not precision mechanics. The Chinese invented armillary spheres, but no surviving devices matched this complexity. Even the great civilizations that followed, the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age, the master inventors of the Renaissance,
None left behind anything remotely similar until the mechanical clocks of the 14th century. It was as if the mechanism had been made by a civilization that, despite its brilliance, would forget its own genius. Knowledge rises, knowledge falls, and sometimes it vanishes completely. Imagine what it meant for an ancient Greek to possess this device, a machine that predicted eclipses, a box that imitated the cosmos, a tool capable of teaching the sky. It would have seemed like magic, but it was mathematics. It would have seemed divine, but it was engineering. It would have seemed prophetic, but it was logic. And yet, the world around it had not been ready to preserve it. Libraries burned, scrolls decayed, wars swallowed the knowledge of scholars, empires rose and fell like waves against the shore. And in that chaos, the technological lineage of the Antikythera Mechanism broke. This was perhaps the greatest tragedy of ancient science. The machine was not simply lost. The idea of the machine was lost. When Price presented his early findings, engineers reacted with disbelief. One clockmaker in London stared at the reconstruction for a long time before speaking. He said finally, "This shouldn't exist. A differential gear of this design doesn't appear until the 14th century."
Price nodded, and yet here it is. It's as if someone skipped a millennium. And that was exactly what it felt like. The Antikythera Mechanism was a medieval machine trapped in an ancient world, a glimpse of a technological future cut short too early to take root. Some scholars speculated that there were once other mechanisms like it, perhaps dozens, perhaps hundreds, teaching tools in academies, navigation aids on ships, gifts for kings. But bronze melts easily. Wood decays. Iron rusts. And history is a brutal archivist. Only one survived. Only one clung to existence long enough to wash ashore on a diver's palm 20 centuries later. A single survivor of a lost scientific ecosystem. A fossil of genius. Price began to study not just Greece, but the intellectual climate surrounding the mechanism's era. He found hints of brilliance all around it. Archimedes' devices for measuring celestial positions, Hipparchus' astonishing lunar theory, Poseidon's studies of ocean tides, Hero of Alexandria's automata and steam toys, philosophers debating the nature of planets as mechanical orbs. The ideas were there. The theories were flourishing. The genius was present. And yet, for reasons no historian could fully explain, the momentum halted. The mechanism was not the beginning of a technological revolution, it was the climax of one. A peak, a summit, followed by a long slide into forgetfulness. One night, Price sat alone in the museum, staring at the fragments under a dim light that flickered like a heartbeat. The room was silent, save for the occasional hum of the bulbs. He leaned close, running his fingers lightly along a corroded gear. What happened to your world? The machine, of course, did not answer, but its silence felt heavy, sad,
like the quiet after a great fire has burned a library to ash. Price wondered, did the engineer of roads live to see his work appreciated? Did others learn from it? Was he celebrated or forgotten even in his own time? Was the mechanism cherished, or did it gather dust on a shelf until it was packed onto the doomed ship? There was no way to know, but he suspected something profound. The mechanism's creator lived in a world filled with genius, but also fragility. Knowledge is not permanent. It must be guarded, taught, copied, preserved. And for 1,000 reasons, war, politics, invasion, neglect, the ancient world failed to protect its brightest flame. Price once told a colleague, if just one copy of this device had survived into the Middle Ages, the scientific revolution would have begun centuries earlier. It was not exaggeration.
With such a machine, astronomy would have advanced dramatically. Navigation would have leapt ahead. Mechanical engineering would have exploded. Clockmaking would have begun far earlier. The Renaissance might have ignited in the Roman era. The mechanism was not just a device, it was a doorway, a road history failed to take. And now, thousands of years later, humanity was only beginning to understand what had been lost. The Antikythera Mechanism is not surrounded by predecessors. It does not belong to a family of inventions. It has no siblings, no parents, no descendants. It is a lone star in a dark expanse, a masterpiece without a lineage, a marvel without a context, a whisper from a civilization that possessed more brilliance than history ever granted it credit for. And that is why it matters, because it proves that human genius is not linear. It flares, it vanishes, it returns. We are not the first to reach for the stars. We are simply the first to have the means to preserve the reaching. The mechanism stands as a monument to what ancient minds were capable of, and a warning of how easily such greatness can be lost. The storm had long passed, but its echo lived on, not in the waves that once swallowed the ancient ship near Antikythera, but in the minds of the scholars who now stood at the threshold of a new revelation. For though the first discovery of the mechanism had been accidental, the second discovery was something far more deliberate, an awakening born of modern tools, relentless curiosity, and a desire to hear the machine speak more clearly than ever before. By the time the 21st century dawned, the Antikythera Mechanism had already astonished the world. Scholars had studied it for decades, and Price's reconstruction had transformed the fragments from a curiosity into a cosmic instrument. But still, many of the mechanism's secrets remained hidden. The fragments, though miraculous, were wounded. Bronze plates fused into lumps, delicate gears cracked by time, inscriptions lost beneath crusts of corrosion. The machine had more to say, but its voice was muffled by the centuries. Modern science was about to unmute it. In early 2005, a group of researchers assembled in Athens for what would become one of the most extraordinary collaborative efforts in archaeological science. Historians, physicists, mathematicians, paleographers, engineers. Among them was Tony Freeth, a mathematician with a mind sharpened by logic and softened by awe. He had read Price's studies with reverence, but believed, quietly, stubbornly, that the mechanism's full truth had not yet been reached. Standing before the fragments for the first time, Freeth felt a sensation Price himself had once described, the feeling that the pieces were alive, waiting. The museum had agreed to grant the team rare access to the fragments.
This time, armed not with simple magnifying glasses, but with weapons forged in the fires of modern technology. They brought with them two machines. One to see beneath, one to see within. Both would change everything. The first device wheeled into the museum resembled something from a science fiction film. Large, metallic, filled with chambers, cooling tubes, and humming electronics. Its creators called it
The fractional micron surface scanner. It projected beams of structured light across the fragments, recording minuscule details. The tiniest scratches, the faintest grooves, the partial letters carved by hands long dead. When the first scan began, the researchers leaned forward as shimmering patterns danced across their screens. The light crawled over the bronze like a living thing, revealing microscopic details unseen for 2,000 years. And letters began to appear. Inscriptions hidden under layers of decay resurfaced. Words long thought erased breathed again. Sentences emerged like ghosts, returning to tell their stories. The room grew quiet. No one dared speak. They watched, spellbound, as the mechanism unveiled its voice. But the second device was even more powerful. A machine designed not to inspect surfaces, but to penetrate them. A high-powered X-ray tomography system, nicknamed Blade Runner for the way it sliced imagery into layers of bronze finer than a human hair. It could see inside the fragments, inside the crust, inside the gears, into the very bones of the mechanism. Piece by piece, they placed the main fragments into the machine. The screens lit up with ghostly images, gears hidden deep within gears, teeth buried under centuries of oxidation, tiny holes for pins and axles, and inscriptions tucked into cracks no human eye could ever reach. Freeth leaned close, his face inches from the glowing monitor. "My God, there's a whole gear here," someone whispered. "And there's text, more than we ever imagined. Look at this one, internal teeth. No one has seen this for 2,000 years." The machine was breathing again, its skeleton reforming under modern eyes. The scholars didn't just see shapes, they saw purpose. Not fragments, they saw systems. Not corrosion, they saw design. The mechanism was revealing its soul. As the scans continued, the number of discovered inscriptions multiplied, 5 times more than previously known. More than 2,000 characters emerged in spirals, lines, grids, and curved arcs. Words of instruction, words of calibration, words naming cycles, words describing the heavens. The mechanism was not merely a machine. It was a book, a textbook of astronomy, etched into metal. Freeth realized something profound. The creator had wanted the user to understand the cosmos, not simply operate the machine. This was not a secret device. It was a teaching tool, a model, a guide, a way to share the universe with human hands. Even more astonishing were the new gears revealed by the tomography scans. Gears that Price himself had never known existed. Tiny wheels buried deep within the corrosion, overlapping axles, hidden structures that completed cycles scholars had long debated. One by one, the team traced gear trains that had once controlled the back dials, the eclipse spiral, the lunar anomaly system, and, astonishingly, motion that Price had not predicted. A new picture took shape, a larger picture, a more complete machine. And with each discovery, a single question grew louder. What else had the machine once contained? The missing pieces were countless, but the story was coming together.
Freeth felt the first stirrings of an idea, a theory that would later reshape the entire understanding of the mechanism.
But for now, he remained silent, letting the hum of the tomography machine wash over him like a lullaby of gears. The most shocking inscriptions came from the remnants of the mechanism's back cover, a bronze plate so corroded it was once thought to be blank. But the scanners saw through the crust, and beneath it, a manual, a complete guide describing the functions of the back dials, a text outlining planetary cycles, eclipse predictions, star risings, and more. A cosmic encyclopedia. Metal pages from a lost textbook. Wisdom carved into bronze when much of the world still lived in mud huts and wooden shacks. Freeth read the words aloud with reverence. Cycles of the moon. Phases. Eclipses. Games. Games? Yes. The mechanism had tracked the dates of the Olympic Games, and the Nemean, and the Pythian. Time measured not only by stars, but by humanity. The mechanism did not just imitate the heavens, it linked the universe to the lives of the people who watched it. By the time the scanners finished their work, the Antikythera Mechanism had transformed from a shattered artifact to a resurrected marvel. It now glowed with new meaning. Its gears pulsed with purpose. Its inscriptions read like poetry from another age. But the greatest revelation was still to come. For hidden among the new data was the seed of a theory that would challenge everything Price had believed possible. A theory that would elevate the mechanism from extraordinary to almost mythical. Night had fallen over Athens like a great velvet curtain, yet the small room inside the museum glowed with electric light and human anticipation. Papers cluttered every surface. Diagrams, scans, notes scribbled in the margins with arrows forming frantic constellations. Gear sketches overlapped with astronomical cycles. Photographs lay scattered like fallen leaves. In the middle of it all stood Tony Freeth, perfectly still, his eyes locked on the newest scan displayed across a monitor. He wasn't breathing. Or perhaps he had simply forgotten how to. For weeks, he and the team had been deciphering the newly revealed inscriptions in gears. They had mapped every tooth, every ratio, every ghostly shape revealed by the tomography scans. They had reconstructed, revised, corrected, and reconstructed again. Each night brought them closer to the heart of the mechanism, yet something remained missing, something essential, something central, something that would complete the universe in bronze. Tonight, they were about to find it. The latest scan showed a gear that had long defied explanation, a small, shallow fragment with internal teeth, unlike anything else in the device. Its position made no sense. Its connection seemed contradictory. It felt like a fragment from a different machine entirely. Freeth leaned closer. He adjusted the scan layer by layer, peeling back corrosion like the pages of a book. And then he saw it. A groove. A pin. A secondary track carved inside the plate. A mechanism within a mechanism. His heart slammed against his ribs. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." But it was. The groove matched a mathematical formula found in ancient Babylonian astronomical texts, one copied and expanded by Greek scholars like Hipparchus. A formula describing planetary motion.
Retrograde motion. The strange looping path planets appeared to make in the sky, moving forward, slowing, reversing, looping, and moving forward again. For 2,000 years, people had believed the Antikythera Mechanism showed only the motion of the sun and moon. But this groove, this tiny, hidden groove, proved otherwise. The mechanism had once tracked the planets. The device was far more than a simple lunar calculator, far more than an eclipse engine. It was a complete cosmic computer. Freeth staggered back, gripping the edge of the desk for support. "We were wrong," he murmured. "Price was wrong. Everyone was wrong. The mechanism wasn't merely impressive. It wasn't just advanced. It was impossible." The inscriptions revealed more. Lines of text long buried beneath corrosion now spoke clearly. Phenomenon, the appearance. Asteres planetae, the wandering stars. References to periods of Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Calculations for synodic cycles. Corrections for planetary anomalies. The ancient Greeks had not been satisfied with tracking the moon, or predicting eclipses, or marking calendars. They had attempted something no one would achieve again until the Renaissance. They built a model of the solar system, not heliocentric, but drawn with astounding mathematical skill. Each planet required its own special gear train, its own system of differential motion, its own mathematical corrections for retrograde paths. Freeth could feel his pulse in his fingertips. This was no teaching toy. It wasn't no novelty. It was the crown jewel of ancient science. A computational instrument representing the entire sky. Freeth knew exactly what this meant. Whoever built the mechanism had fused two worlds: theoretical astronomy and precision engineering. This was not simply an astronomer with a clever idea, nor a craftsman with steady hands. It was a collaboration, or perhaps a single genius, who saw the cosmos as a system of cycles, ratios, and interconnected motions. Hipparchus's lunar equation lived inside the gears. Babylonian planetary cycles hid within the inscriptions. Greek mathematical models shaped the gear ratios. Mechanical artistry carved the bronze into delicate precision. This engineer had taken the entire intellectual heritage of the ancient world and turned it into a machine. Freeth felt humbled, almost reverent. He whispered into the quiet room, "Who were you?" The fragments did not answer, but their silence was no longer empty. It was a silence filled with brilliance. Now began the true challenge: building the full reconstruction.
A working model of the mechanism, with all of its planetary indicators restored. The team gathered around a long table, spreading out the scans and diagrams. They debated ratios, tested gear meshes, adjusted assumptions. The workshop echoed with the scratch of pencils, the rustling of papers, and the occasional gasp of astonishment when a new gear train locked into place. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, the mechanism grew in their minds. A front dial displaying the zodiac, the Greek calendar, the positions of the sun, the moon's phases, and now the wandering planets. A back dial spiraling through the Metonic cycle, the Calopic refinement, the Olympiad cycle, and the Saros eclipse prediction engine. Every gear had a purpose, every dial a meaning, every ratio a hidden star. And when the diagrams were complete, Freeth knew they had done it. They had rebuilt the ancient universe. The team commissioned the construction of a physical model, just as Price had once done. But this time, the reconstruction was complete, fully realized, a symphony of celestial mechanics. Bronze discs were cut. Gears were carved by hand. Axles were polished.
Pins and slots were fitted with exquisite precision. Finally, the reconstructed mechanism sat on the table, the morning sun reflecting off its polished surfaces. Freeth stepped forward. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from awe. He turned the crank. The universe moved. The sun glided through the zodiac. The moon rotated, waxing and waning. Mars looped into its retrograde arc. Jupiter drifted in its slow, majestic march. Saturn followed its distant path. Eclipse markers advanced across the back spiral like shadows chasing the sky. The entire cosmos, the dance of the heavens, compressed into a box no larger than a book. Freeth closed his eyes as the soft clicking filled the room. The ancient engineer was alive again. The lost knowledge breathed once more, and the silence of 20 centuries finally broke into the gentle music of gears. The reconstruction proved something extraordinary. The Antikythera Mechanism was not an anomaly, it was an apex, a triumph of a civilization that combined observation, mathematics, craftsmanship, and imagination into a single, breathtaking creation.
No other device like it has been found. No documents describe another. No workshop records survive. It is a miracle of survival, a lone ambassador of ancient genius. And now it had risen again. Not from the sea, but from understanding. For weeks, the reconstructed mechanism sat on a long wooden table in the museum workshop, gleaming softly under the overhead lights. Its gears turned with the quiet grace of something alive. Its dials traced the paths of the heavens. And every time Tony Freeth walked past it, he felt the same thing, a kind of reverent hush, as though he were in the presence of a long-lost oracle. But the mechanism had one more secret to reveal, one more voice waiting to be heard, one final message left behind by the ancient engineer. They were not hidden in the gears, nor in the dials, nor in the mathematical brilliance of its cycles. They were hidden in the words, the inscriptions, thousands of tiny, delicate letters, carved into bronze like whispers preserved in metal. Freeth knew what came next. They had reconstructed the machine, but not the mind behind it. To understand that, they had to read its language, understand its intentions, listen to the voice of its creator. And so the scholars gathered again, now around the inscriptions illuminated by digital scans. Paleographers, linguists, historians, the custodians of ancient words arrived with notebooks and magnifiers. They leaned close, tracing every letter, and slowly the machine began to speak. The first revelation was that the mechanism wasn't simply a device. It was a book, a manual, a star map, an astronomical encyclopedia carved onto bronze plates. Where a modern user would read a printed guide, the ancients read inscriptions engraved directly into the machine. Some sections were neatly arranged, others crammed between gears where only the careful eye of a dedicated scholar could find them. The language was not poetic. It was practical, direct, clear. It spoke to someone not in wonder, but in mastery. The maker of the mechanism had not built a device to amaze. He had built one to educate, to pass knowledge forward, to build minds, to ensure understanding survived. Ironically, it almost hadn't. As the team studied the new translations, they discovered entire sections explaining the cosmos in extraordinary detail. descriptions of the lunar phases, instructions for predicting eclipses, mathematical notes on celestial cycles, explanations of planetary motions, references to star risings and settings, lists of astronomical events. Every line was written with confidence, as though the writer took pride not simply in knowing, but in teaching. One inscription read, "The moon advances through its phases according to its anomaly." Another,
"The Saros cycle repeats eclipses with precision." Yet another, "The wandering stars appear in their signs and retrograde in due season." It was as if the engineer had etched his understanding of the moving heavens into the very bones of the machine. Not poetry, not religion, not superstition. Pure science carved in shining metal. But there was more, something unexpected. A small inscription on one of the backplates, almost lost to corrosion, read, "For the instruction of those who wish to understand the cosmos." Freeth read it aloud slowly, and when he finished, the room fell silent. This was not the voice of a secretive alchemist, nor a guarded mathematician, nor a philosopher obsessed with mystery. This was the voice of a teacher, a human being, a mind reaching across centuries, a craftsman who wanted others to think, explore, and learn. Freeth imagined him, a man hunched over a bench, bronze filings dusting his hands, carving these tiny letters with patience and purpose. Someone who believed knowledge was a gift to be shared, not hidden. Someone who loved the stars enough to give them shape, gears, pointers, cycles, and place them into the hands of another. A man who had left behind not just a machine, but a message. Learn. Then came another surprise. Among the astronomical instructions were references not only to the movements of the heavens, but to events on Earth. Dates of festivals, cycles of athletic games, the years of Olympiads. The mechanism was not simply a cosmic calculator. It was a living calendar, tying the rhythms of the sky to the rhythms of human life. One inscription listed the timing of the Olympic Games. Another recorded the Nemean Games. Another referenced the Pythian Games. Freeth felt wonder sweep through him. This machine had united the heavens and humanity. It had connected stars and athletes, eclipses and celebrations. It treated human time as part of cosmic time, as though the engineer believed that the sky's great clock made room for the beating hearts of men. As more inscriptions were translated, a picture emerged of the machine's creator. He was a scholar of astronomy, a master of mathematics, an engineer of unmatched precision, a teacher devoted to sharing knowledge, a philosopher who believed the universe followed rational laws, and perhaps a man who feared that knowledge might be lost. Why else carve so many instructions? Why else embed explanations between the gears? Perhaps he knew the fragility of human memory. Perhaps he had seen wars looming. Perhaps he lived in a time of uncertainty. So he carved knowledge into bronze, believing metal might endure where parchment and libraries might fail. And he was right. His writings had outlived empires. The inscriptions spoke more than cycles. They spoke of intention, of clarity, of the desire to show others that the cosmos was not chaos, but order. One line, translated late at night by a weary scholar, brought tears to her eyes. Nothing in the heavens is without measure. Freeth wrote the words in his notebook. He circled them, underlined them. This was the key. The mechanism's creator had not built it to dazzle. He had built it to reveal order, to show that the unpredictable sky, the eclipses, the retrogrades, the shifting moon were all governed by rules, that the universe had logic, that nature could be understood, that knowledge could be shared. This was not just a message, it was a gift.
A gift the world had forgotten. A gift it had nearly lost. A gift it had finally recovered. Late one night, after most of the team had gone home, Freeth remained alone in the dim glow of the lamp. He held a small fragment with tiny inscriptions barely visible even with magnification. He turned it gently between his fingers, eyes straining to read the ancient Greek letters. Then, suddenly, he understood. The message wasn't about eclipses, nor planets, nor cycles. It was about the machine itself. A final inscription, translated with care, read, "This is the nature of the cosmos." Freeth closed his eyes. The machine was not a model of the universe. It was the universe, captured, simplified, explained. The engineer had given humanity the heavens in a box, and across 2,000 years he had left behind one simple truth. The reconstructed mechanism sat in the quiet museum room like a sleeping giant, compact, intricate, timeless. It made no sound unless touched, yet its presence filled the space with an almost sacred gravity. Anyone who entered felt it immediately. The sense that they were not merely looking at an artifact, but standing in the presence of an idea powerful enough to cross millennia. Tony Freeth stood before it at dawn. The city outside was still asleep. The museum's marble hallways echoed only with the soft hum of lights. A faint glow crept across the table, illuminating the bronze gears just enough to make them shimmer as though stirring from dreams. The universe inside the mechanism waited patiently, its cycles ready to turn again at the touch of a hand. Freeth exhaled slowly. This was the final moment, the end of a journey that began centuries before he was born, and centuries after the machine's maker had turned to dust. He reached out, touched the handle, and gave the mechanism one gentle turn. The gears engaged. The planets began their dance. The moon waxed and waned. The sun slid through the zodiac. Eclipses marched across the spiraled back dial. A cosmos brought to life. Freeth felt a swell of emotion he could neither fully name nor contain, a trembling mixture of awe, gratitude, and sorrow. This was the legacy of a civilization that had once reached for the stars and been forgotten. History often tells stories of triumph, of empires rising,
of heroes conquering, of cities flourishing. But the story of the Antikythera Mechanism is different. It is a story of loss. Not the loss of wealth, not the loss of battles, but the loss of knowledge. For every gear in the mechanism, for every inscription, for every mathematical insight carved in bronze, there must have been countless others. Tools, volumes, workshops, teachers, students, libraries, all vanished, burned, buried, forgotten. The mechanism was not the peak of ancient knowledge. It was the remnant, a single ember in the ashes of a forgotten fire. Freeth ran his hand lightly across the wooden case. He imagined an ancient workshop filled with scholars and craftsmen, voices debating, tools clinking, ideas moving like constellations overhead. He imagined the engineer himself, steady hands guiding a gear into place, perhaps unaware that he was creating something the world would not match again for centuries. Such brilliance should have spread, should have grown, should have shaped the future. Instead, it sank beneath the waves. Freeth often wondered, what would have happened if the mechanism had survived? If copies had been made? If its principles had inspired generations? Would the Industrial Revolution have come early? Would astronomy have accelerated? Would humanity have reached beyond the Earth sooner? The Antikythera Mechanism was a technological spark that never caught fire, a masterpiece born too early, too isolated, too fragile. Its civilization forgot it, and because of that, the world forgot it too. The silence of 1,000 years hangs heavy on its gears. And yet, though the knowledge sank, though the centuries passed, though the world changed, the machine survived. Barely. Wounded. Corroded. But not destroyed.
A whisper carried across ages. A message written in bronze instead of ink. A testament carved not for its own time, but unknowingly for ours. Freeth watched the mechanism turn. The quiet clicking echoed across the room like the ticking of a clock, not measuring seconds, but eras. The machine was an ancient promise that human genius is eternal. It rises, it falls, it is forgotten, it is remembered. Civilizations may collapse, but brilliance can endure beneath the waves for 2,000 years, waiting for someone with the curiosity to uncover it. This thought struck Freeth harder than any discovery he made in the lab. The Antikythera Mechanism was not simply a device. It was a story about people. People who looked up at the sky and refused to see chaos. People who believed the universe could be understood. People who sharpened bronze and minds alike. People who trusted in knowledge more than superstition. People who left behind a message without knowing it. We were capable of greatness, and so are you. The mechanism was not only a relic, it was a mirror. Every time someone studied it, they saw not just the past, but the future that might have been, and the future that still could be. As the morning sun filled the room, the mechanism's dials glowed softly, as if illuminated from within. The shadows of its gears stretched across the table like the branches of an ancient tree. Freeth stepped back, then further, until he stood at the edge of the room, watching the tiny universe revolve. He whispered, "You did not fail. We found you." The engineer who crafted it, the students who learned from it, the sailors who carried it, the storm that sunk it, the divers who recovered it, the scholars who rebuilt it, all were part of a single improbable chain of fate. The civilization that forged the mechanism was gone, but its brilliance was not. The gears kept turning. The story kept unfolding. The legacy lived on. Freeth returned to the mechanism one last time. He placed his hand on the crank. He did not turn it to study the moon. He did not turn it to predict an eclipse. He did not turn it to calculate anything at all. He turned it to honor the engineer. The gears clicked. The cosmos turned. And Freeth whispered, "Thank you." Not to a machine, but to a mind that had reached across 2,000 years to show that humanity, even in its most ancient days, was capable of extraordinary things. The mechanism had fulfilled its final purpose, not to predict the heavens, but to remind the world of its forgotten genius. The legacy of a lost civilization now lived again, in bronze, in memory, in wonder. A universe in a box. A whisper from the past. A promise to the future. The story was complete, but the inspiration had only begun.